In the vast solitude of Siberia, where the wind whispers stories of the past and the ice has spent centuries hoarding secrets, a discovery broke the silence of the glaciers. On the remote Lyakovsky Islands, a small archipelago in northern Russia bathed by the freezing Arctic waters, a team of scientists embarked on an investigation into the permafrost and the impact of its progressive thawing. And although the dream of finding remains of extinct fauna trapped for millennia in that icy prison seemed wildly improbable, they found the needle in the haystack. Suddenly, amidst their observations, a figure emerged, the body partially covered in ice yet unmistakable, a woolly mammoth. It wasn't a jumble of bones, it was a perfectly preserved corpse. Yuka, as the team behind the discovery named her, was presented to the global media amid great expectation. They had uncovered the body of a young female mammoth that died around 39,000 years ago, during the last glacial period. Later, in 2012, the Institute of Applied Ecology of the Russian Academy of Sciences obtained permission to conduct a more detailed analysis of this unique specimen. An autopsy revealed something extraordinary. Her soft tissues were intact. Inside her stomach, they found undigested food remains, and most remarkably, they discovered liquid blood still within her body. Everything indicated that the mammoth had died quickly, likely buried by snow, which caused her digestion to halt abruptly. Her preservation thousands of years later was plausible due to this sudden freezing with no prior decomposition. Similarly, it was reasonable to find her tissues well preserved because the Siberian permafrost acts as a natural freezer, maintaining sub-zero temperatures and instantly freezing the body, within hours, preventing bacteria from proliferating in muscle, bone marrow, and skin. They also observed that what they initially believed to be blood was in fact a dark liquid that behaved like blood, but was denser and richer in hemoglobin. This fluid, not blood in the strict scientific sense, remained in a liquid state thanks to its anti-freeze properties. The scientists celebrated the find. It was a milestone for paleontology, for the study of DNA in extinct species, and for research in the field of cryopreservation. But far from the laboratories, someone was lighting the fuse of a conspiratorial bomb. From across the ocean, a man had revived a myth and turned it into a media phenomenon. Rodney Clough, the author and leading contemporary proponent of a conspiracy theory, made a bold claim on social media. That mammoth didn't die 40,000 years ago. It came from the inner world. It accidentally ascended to our surface and got trapped. It was the proof we had been searching for. Clough was the spiritual leader of an old obsession, the idea that our planet hides a world beneath our feet, a forgotten paradise, a lost utopia, silenced by power, an inner kingdom inhabited by ancestral beings and a civilization beyond our dreams. With him, the so-called Hollow Earth theory was being rediscovered by the world. Clough had written the book The World's Greatest Secret, Our Earth is Hollow, a pseudo-scientific work where he compiled testimonies, theories, and supposed evidence that advanced civilizations live inside the planet and that we are forbidden from contacting them. In 2007, he even attempted to organize an expedition to the North Pole to find one of the 3 entrances to that subterranean realm for the modest price of $20,000 per person. Unsurprisingly, the personal adventure of this marketing genius never materialized, but he continued to establish himself as an influential voice within the conspiracy subculture. In his vision of the inner world, Clough spoke of a sun suspended in the center of the earth, divided into day and night, creating ideal conditions for life to flourish, allowing trees in this inner earth to grow up to 300 meters tall, and its human inhabitants to reach over 4 meters in height. a society that shared this realm with supposedly extinct animals, mammoths and dinosaurs included, who had found in this haven a place to thrive, far from the suffering of the surface world. In essence, the idea behind the Hollow Earth theory is that we live on a kind of shell, and beneath us lies a vast cavity with its own atmosphere and unique flora and fauna. A worldview that apparently predates the written word. To support something that lacked any scientific basis, proponents pointed to cave paintings and ancient drawings in which our ancestors depicted deities emerging from the depths of the earth to communicate with humans. The concept of a kingdom beneath our feet persisted for millennia, with each culture reinterpreting the idea in its own way. But the origin of the modern conspiracy phenomenon had a very specific date. In 1908, American novelist Willis George Emerson published a work that, although not a massive commercial success at the time, had a lasting impact in esoteric and pseudoscientific circles. The Smoky God was described by Emerson himself as a true account, not fiction, a book that narrated the testimony a friend and neighbor had shared with him on his deathbed. The story of a god reigning in the Inner Empire. Olaf Jansen was a Norwegian sailor who lived in Stockholm with his father, a fisherman seasoned by the frigid northern waters. In the spring of 1829, when Olaf was 19, the two set sail in a small boat to fish in the seas near Norway. But the farther north they sailed, the stranger the journey became. Their compass stopped working, the needle simply pressed against the glass. And suddenly, they found themselves caught in a storm like none they had ever witnessed. After several hours in which their boat was tossed about like a mere toy into unknown seas, the waters finally calmed, and in the distance, they saw a small reddish sun. As they continued to sail toward it, they eventually spotted land, but nothing made sense. In what, according to their route, should have been the North Pole, they disembarked in a tropical landscape. While gathering fruit, they watched as a ship approached them, astonished to see 12 giants emerge from it. Standing over 4 meters tall, these beings, curious and friendly, invited father and son aboard their vessel. And so began a visit to that land of giants that would last nearly 2 years. Olaf learned everything about them, the customs, language, and beliefs of beings with a life expectancy of over 800 years. In his eyes, they were gods, carriers of astonishing technology, which they proudly revealed alongside the astounding secret: the earth was hollow inside. Guided by that storm, and at the mercy of the ocean's fury, Olaf and his father had entered through one of the openings to that kingdom at the North Pole. The ocean waters flowed into that opening and continued inward, bound to the reverse side of the Earth's crust by the law of gravity. And they were now living in that vast inner world, illuminated by an inner sun, smaller, reddish, and hazy, known as the Smoky God. Their kingdom was an inner continent, full of radiant cities, harnessing all natural energies and cultivating fertile land, while worshipping that sun as a source of life and wisdom. After those 2 years, father and son decided it was time to close that chapter and return home. They knew, having been warned by the giants, that the journey back to the surface would be dangerous, but they chose to attempt it nonetheless. Tragically, near the opening to the outer earth, they were caught in powerful currents. Their boat capsized, the father drowned, and Olaf, for his part, was rescued by a Scottish whaling ship that brought him safely to dry land. Upon returning home, he told everyone about his incredible journey to the center of the earth, to the land of giants, but no one believed him. In fact, he was committed to an asylum for a time. Once released, he returned to his life as a fisherman, never speaking of his adventure again, until he retired to California to live out his final years. It was there on his deathbed that he recounted the story to Willis George Emerson, who would narrate it in The Smoky God. It was a small book, published without great ambition, a testimony presented as true, suggesting the existence of a hidden world within our own, inhabited by an advanced civilization beneath our feet. Most read it as fantastical fiction, others as a spiritual allegory, but a few took it as literal truth. The seed of an obsession with the occult, with that ancient secret the modern world had tried to bury, had been planted. A seed that would blossom in the shadows of a world in ashes. When the foundations of civilization fell, those who spread darkness longed to find that lost kingdom beyond the horizon. Two years after the man who would shake the foundations of the world had seized the power he had always dreamed of, after false promises and hopes steeped in hate and demagoguery had handed him the keys to an empire through democracy, the Nazi Party had full authority to reshape the nation. Hitler had begun to raise the pillars of his totalitarian regime, pillars built on the premise that Germans were a superior race, humans of a pure nature who held the legitimate right to dominate the world. Aware of the need to justify the military expansion and genocide to come, the leader of the SS and one of the top figures of the Nazi Party, Heinrich Himmler, founded the Ahnenerbe, or Ancestral Heritage, on July 1, 1935, an association that would finance and support research activities to prove that the Germanic people were a superior type of humanity. With distorted and exaggerated results, grounded in pseudoscientific beliefs, that mix of archaeological institute, racial studies center, and secret agency devoted to the occult gathered scientific figures who, threatened by the power of the Third Reich, were compelled to prove that official history was an imposed lie, and that there were echoes of forbidden knowledge proving the existence of a superior Aryan race. And one of those teachings came from that book written in the early 20th century, from the tale of that fisherman and the land of the giants. The Smoky God had become enshrined as a truthful testimony in the ideological pillars of Nazism. Key figures within the Ahnenerbe believed that the Aryan race originated from that inner world, that the Aryans were direct descendants of that subterranean civilization visited by Olaf Jansen, more ancient and advanced, who had sought refuge beneath the Earth's surface since prehistoric times. A gift to their narrative of the Superman and the search for a sacred genealogy. They weren't chasing mere myths of mystical archaeology. They craved to reconnect with that source of ancestral power. The Ahnenerbe was calling on those scientists to participate in a confidential mission to confirm a theory that could change the destiny of the Third Reich, to find the entrance to that lost realm beneath the world. The idea of a hidden realm beneath our feet had inhabited the human imagination for millennia. Sometimes it had been a place of punishment, other times an empire of wisdom, and on more than one occasion, the very origin of humanity. Before we understood our bond with the stars, we believed everything came from below, from that invisible, forbidden, and tremendously powerful world. The earliest human expressions of a connection with the Earth's interior can already be found in countless cave paintings. In many Paleolithic caves, there are depictions of deities emerging from the Earth to communicate with humankind. A kingdom whose entrances rested in the cracks of mountains. With the birth of writing in what is considered the oldest literary work in the world, An inner empire is also mentioned. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, written sometime between 2500 and 2000 BCE, there is a description of an underworld ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal, a dark subterranean place where all the dead went, regardless of moral standing. This idea from Sumerian Akkadian mythology became one of the earliest accounts of an inner world, accessible only through ritual or death. The concept of an underground realm where souls go after death had its roots in this Mesopotamian underworld, later absorbed and transformed by many subsequent religions and cultures. For the Greeks, that underground world was Hades, inhabited by the shadows of the dead. Philosophers like Empedocles imagined the earth as having internal compartments or regions, worlds within the world, with concentric structures where souls resided. Similar stories can be found in American cultures. For the Hopi people, humanity emerged from the interior, specifically through a sacred hole called the Sipapu. Similarly, the Incas spoke of hidden cities beneath Lake Titicaca and of a subterranean world inhabited by ancestral beings. In Mayan mythology, there's the story of two twins who descend into Xibalba, their underworld, to face the Lords of Death. After defeating them, they return transformed and glorified. Humanity is reborn through the twins and their return from the underworld, a vision entirely opposed to the one that would take root with Christianity. The Church structured that concept of the underworld into the Christian hell, a place of eternal punishment beneath the earth. Dante, in his Divine Comedy, transformed it into a structured, tiered space that culminated precisely in the heart of the planet, where Satan remained imprisoned in a lake of ice. However, one of the richest and most magnetic cores, whose symbolic power would later help modern theories flourish, lay in tantric traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, there was talk of hidden realms inside the earth. One of them is Shambhala, a place of pure enlightenment described as a land of wisdom, harmony, and truth. Mixing that Eastern mysticism with Western esoteric interpretations emerged the legend of Agartha, a vast and luminous subterranean kingdom with majestic cities and incredibly advanced technology, inhabited and ruled by a superior ancestral civilization. A hidden empire, but one connected to the surface through secret tunnels spread all over the world, from the Himalayas to Antarctica, and even through sacred volcanoes. The central figure of Agartha is the one known as the King of the World, a spiritual ruler who watches over planetary balance and can communicate telepathically with the great leaders of the surface world when humanity is in danger. This was precisely what many believed Hitler would be capable of, establishing contact with the king of humankind as an equal. As Eastern esoteric traditions reached Europe, the myth of Agartha began to merge with the biblical story of the earthly paradise where God placed the first man and woman. The story of Genesis was taking a new path. The idea that the Garden of Eden was not destroyed after the expulsion of Adam and Eve, but rather buried and hidden underground, was beginning to grow among Christian occultists. Perhaps Agartha was, in fact, the lost paradise, and it still existed, concealed beyond the edges of the world. Some even claim that Jesus Christ descended into that realm during the 3 days in the tomb, not as the punishment traditionally described in the descent into hell, but as a visit to a spiritual kingdom where humanity had committed original sin and fallen into the hands of the devil. It was clear that there was nothing real in all those tales, that the idea of a hollow earth with an empire rising beneath the world had no basis. Myths, legends, and allegories about the struggle between light and darkness, between good and evil. There was only one moment in history when that concept came close to brushing the hand of science. At the beginning of the 18th century, science and superstition shared a seat in the same hall, and hypotheses, no matter how extravagant they may seem to modern eyes, still had a place among the learned. One such man was Edmund Halley, the British astronomer, famous for calculating the orbit of the comet named after him, was not content with merely looking at the sky. He also wanted to explore the Earth's depths. In 1692, Halley presented a bold and unsettling idea to the Royal Society. Our world was not a solid sphere. It was a hollow structure composed of several concentric layers. The concept of a hollow Earth was beginning to take on a scientific form through the words of the renowned mathematician. Though it already sounded absurd at the time, Halley's hypothesis stemmed from a legitimate concern in trying to explain a real phenomenon. In his observations as a naval cartographer, the astronomer detected an intriguing event. The Earth's magnetic field was not constant. It seemed to fluctuate over time in an unpredictable way, as if something inside the planet was affecting it. In an era when nothing was known about the Earth's core or internal structure and no solid geophysical explanation existed, Halley concluded that something must be moving underground, disturbing Earth's magnetism. According to his calculations, our planet would be made up of an outer crust about 800 kilometers thick, and inside it, 2 more internal spheres, all rotating in opposite directions and wrapped in an atmosphere. These internal rotations, he suggested, were responsible for the magnetic variations observed on the surface. The most fascinating part of the theory was that the existence of an internal atmosphere made it plausible that life could exist between those layers, isolated from the surface world. Although his proposal was eventually dismissed by the scientific community, which later came to understand that the Earth's liquid outer core of iron and nickel, unknown in Halley's time, stirs over time and causes changes in the magnetic field of a solid Earth. It planted a seed in the collective imagination, inspiring countless stories that would become some of the most celebrated novels in history. Rumors that science had validated the existence of a hollow Earth, with hidden cities and underground worlds, became fertile ground for writers, adventurers, and later, conspiracy theorists. Unwittingly, Halley had opened a door, a threshold someone would attempt to cross much later. On April 10, 1818, during the rapid expansion of the young American nation, over 500 letters arrived in the mailboxes of Congress members, university chancellors, newspapers, and prominent scientists of the time. These letters carried the same message. To the whole world I declare that the Earth is hollow and habitable within. It contains several concentric solid spheres, placed one inside the other, and is open at the poles at an angle of between 12 and 16 degrees. I pledge to prove the truth of what I assert, and am ready to explore the interior of the Earth if the world will support me in my endeavor. This famous circular number 1 was signed by the eccentric officer John Cleves Symmes Jr., who, inspired by Halley but driven by a near-mystical intuition of his own, believed the poles were not sealed ice caps but entrances to the inner world, giant openings 6,500 kilometers in diameter. According to the retired captain, passing through them would lead to an inner realm, a warmer world far from the cold of the North and South Poles, likely inhabited by extinct beings and a civilization more advanced than humanity. His obsession was such that he wanted to organize an expedition to the Arctic with congressional support. In 1823, the President of the United States was James Monroe. But on the political horizon, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams was beginning to rise in prominence. At that time, Symmes was more active than ever. The North Pole remained an unexplored region, a mystery that fascinated both scientists and adventurers. Symmes and his circle of supporters managed to get the Ohio Congress to pass a resolution supporting his cause, and began seeking backing in Washington. Apparently, Adams was willing to authorize an official expedition to the North Pole, not necessarily because he explicitly believed in Symmes' hollow earth theory, but because as a staunch advocate of scientific progress, he understood the value of Arctic exploration. However, when Adams assumed the presidency in 1825, Symmes' proposal failed to take shape. Congress did not approve the funds, and 4 years later, with the election of Andrew Jackson, the 7th US president and a far more skeptical and pragmatic leader, the door to any official expedition to locate the supposed entrance to the subterranean world was firmly shut. Symmes died that same year in 1829, without having fulfilled his dream of organizing a polar expedition. But the flame of the myth had already been lit. Although the scientific community naturally distanced itself from these baseless tales, literature embraced the idea with enthusiasm. Edgar Allan Poe, Jules Verne, and H.P. Lovecraft, among many others, picked up Symmes' legend to craft stories where the unknown lay beneath our feet, in a hidden world far from the surface. The Hollow Earth had ceased to be a scientific hypothesis and had become an esoteric belief. And that new face of the legend, one that blended mysticism, hidden symbols, and promises of spiritual revelation, began to take shape with one man. Aristocrat, occultist, and esoteric thinker Joseph Alexandre Saint-Yves revived the old idea of a subterranean world and endowed it with a theological, political, and spiritual structure. In 1886, when scientific rationalism seemed to be winning the battle against mysticism, Saint-Yves took the opposite path. He published Mission de l'Inde, a book whose contents he claimed to have received through telepathic contact with the sages of Agartha, the hidden kingdom in the heart of the Himalayas, beneath the earth. He claimed to have traveled to that empire through astral projection and spoken with the king of the world, whose just and peaceful government stood in stark contrast to the chaos of human regimes. Agartha, according to him, was real, a utopia, a futuristic society of exotic architecture, inhabited by wise, long-lived, and happy beings. He was not speaking of a mere world beneath the ground. He spoke of a sacred refuge, an archetype of perfection hidden from the eyes of the modern world, destined to reappear when humanity was ready. With Saint-Yves, the Hollow Earth was no longer just an eccentric hypothesis born from confusion about unexplained Earth phenomena, or the exploratory fever of a former American captain. It became an alternative worldview, a secret silenced by the powerful, a truth accessible only to a chosen few. The turning point had been crossed. The moment when an idea stops seeking evidence to validate it and begins to construct its own belief system. The exact instant when legend becomes conspiracy, and the Hollow Earth an unreachable obsession. The Nazis never found the entrance to that realm where gods were supposed to grant them the power to dominate the world. Mysticism, religion, and lies became tangled paths leading to nowhere. They had been chasing shadows, empty promises. There was only one world. A world that, as it began to heal the wounds of the war that had plunged it into darkness, saw all those fantasies that once fed the ideological machinery of the Third Reich fade away. The Hollow Earth was relegated once again to the realm of fiction, where it should have remained, buried once more among legends. But against all odds, years later, when a forgotten document began to circulate among those who still believed in it, the myth was reborn one last time. A diary supposedly belonging to the man who reached the frozen heart of the world didn't just reignite the flame of the myth, it turned it into fire. A few months after the end of World War II, as the shadow of the Cold War began to spread over the New World, the United States launched one of the largest expeditions to the Antarctic continent in history. Under the name Operation High Jump, in August 1946, a fleet of over 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft set course for the South Pole. The mission's goals were to train military personnel in extreme polar conditions, assess the feasibility of maintaining a permanent military presence in Antarctica, and consolidate various territorial claims. Leading the mission was the famous explorer Richard Evelyn Byrd, a Navy veteran and the first person to fly over the North Pole, a feat he achieved in 1926. Byrd was a symbol of America's dominance over the extreme skies of our world. However, the operation lasted less time than expected. In February 1947, just 6 months after it began, and after establishing a temporary base called Little America 4, the fleet returned to the American continent, abruptly halting its operations. Officially, logistical problems and harsher-than-expected weather conditions were cited. Some planes crashed, others vanished. These incidents pushed for an early withdrawal. Although the operation helped improve understanding of the frozen continent's geography, mapping over 860,000 square kilometers and capturing nearly 15,000 photographs, there were no spectacular discoveries. The mission was archived as a partial success. That was the official story of Operation High Jump. However, decades later, during the 1970s and especially in the 1990s, a text began circulating known as the Secret Diary of Admiral Byrd, supposedly written by the famous aviator during an aerial mission over the South Pole. Though the text was anonymous, this personal diary, allegedly hidden for years, purported to recount an experience never mentioned in official reports. According to the text, during a reconnaissance flight over Antarctica on February 2, 1947 at 6 a.m., Byrd noticed that the snow suddenly disappeared and the climate became temperate, reaching 24 degrees Celsius. The plane began to malfunction, navigation instruments went haywire, and the radio lost all signal. Then, green valleys appeared, lakes, extinct animals, impossible structures, and unidentified aircraft that escorted him to a city of majestic architecture. There, he was received by the inhabitants of Agartha, tall, blonde, and peaceful beings, who warned him that humanity was in danger due to its use of nuclear energy and must change its course immediately to avoid self-destruction and a descent into a dark age. They told him the inner world, the realm he had entered, must remain hidden. Eventually, Byrd was returned to the surface, interrogated by high-ranking Pentagon officials, and forced into silence under threat from the US government, which supposedly hid the diary so no one could know the truth about the empire concealed behind the walls of ice. Of course, no historian was ever able to authenticate the text. The style, content, and dates do not match Byrd's real official journals, which are preserved in historical archives. The consensus is that the secret diary was nothing more than a fabrication that emerged in the 1970s, when the Hollow Earth myth began to resurface with renewed strength. The diary's account was merely apocryphal fiction which, blending fantasy, mysticism, and ufology, started being used as revealed proof by modern believers in the legend. This lie, in the form of a story, became the foundational pillar of the Hollow Earth myth. At the same time, coinciding with this modern resurgence of the legend in 1996, the findings of Paul Richards, a physicist at Columbia University, were interpreted and twisted by Hollow Earth theorists in an attempt to crown their long-awaited scientific evidence. Richards was working with seismic data from the Global Seismographic Network experiment when he discovered a seismic discontinuity in the rotation of Earth's inner core. Essentially, he and his team suggested that the inner core might be rotating slightly faster than Earth's mantle. The scientists explained that this super-rotation was a physical phenomenon within the Earth's core dynamics. At its center, Earth has a solid inner core surrounded by a liquid outer core that, through its motion, generates our planet's magnetic field. This field is in constant turmoil, stirred by the flows of molten metal in the outer core. The inner core, therefore, is magnetically pushed, making it spin slightly faster than the rest of the planet. Yet, despite this perfectly coherent scientific explanation, Hollow Earth advocates seized upon the anomaly to claim it was proof of a disconnection between Earth's layers. A cavity with an inner sun and a civilization living within. Even though Richards never made such claims, his article, purely geophysical in nature, was published in Nature. His data was borrowed by the community, which finally had the perfect fuel. A sprinkle of pseudoscience to feed the myth in late 1990s conspiracy forums, just as the internet was becoming the great rabbit hole for such stories. Turned into unwitting prophets of mystery, Byrd and Richards inspired figures like Rodney Clough, who, during the Diaries boom, revived this wild legacy. Nothing stopped thousands from following them, nor the idea from persisting and growing stronger the more absurd it seemed. Because deep down, conspiracy theories do not seek proof, all they long for is comfort. Comfort in the face of a world we perceive as incomprehensible, chaotic, and manipulated by invisible forces around which we helplessly orbit. The idea of an advanced, honest civilization ready to intervene and save us from ourselves if we insist on our destruction. A world watching us, helping us understand where we come from, is a comforting story. But sadly, that's all it is. A story. Believing someone lives beneath our world is paradoxically less terrifying than accepting we are alone on an indifferent planet. A lonely rock adrift in the vastness of space, sailing through oceans of emptiness. Perhaps that's why, despite everything, some still look not to the stars but to the depths, trying to find refuge in the heart of this pale blue dot.